Hello and welcome to Freethought Forum. Freethought Forum is a joint production of the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm your host, Dale Haste.
And I'm Faithless Forrest. And we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, there are free-thinking atheists and agnostics, and this is a show for them and people curious about leading a life free of superstition.
This is a call-in show, and we do welcome you to call in if you have any questions or comments. The number should be on your screen there. It's 215-2288. So as we go over a few announcements, we encourage you to write that number down or think about questions and comments you may have and plan to call in.
All right. Well, tonight after the show, and actually going on during the show, the Atheist Society of Knoxville has happy hour. It is a meetup at Barley's Tap Room, and you'll want to...
It's in the Old City.
In the Old City. You'll want to look for the silver-covered copy of The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins' book, standing upright on the table, and it's up there over Dale's head. Okay.
It's completely over my head.
All right, and we've got the activities of the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
Right, they meet 3 times a month typically, first and third Sunday of the month. They'll have roundtable discussions or lectures down at the Pellissippi campus of Pellissippi State Community College. And usually the second Sunday of the month, they have a book club at Barnes & Noble. July's book is going to be a book by the author Sam Harris. Title is The Moral Landscape, How Science Can Determine Human Value.
Well, please see our websites for further details, including the times and locations. All right. Well, Dale, we got some plenty of activities in the news.
Right.
June is a great month for Freethought birth anniversaries.
Right. Some of the birthdays this month, or this week in particular, Salman Rushdie, free-thinking author who had a fatwa issued against him by Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. He was born June 19th, 1947. And sharing a birthday of June 24th, Ambrose Bierce, American author, 1842, and Michael Newdow, an American doctor, lawyer, and
litigant
in front of the Supreme Court. He's born in 1953 on June 24th. And lastly, Dan Barker, former evangelical minister and current co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, also known as the Friendly Neighborhood Atheist. He produces another podcast each week, Freethought Today. That's what it's called.
All right. Well, also in the news, the Texas governor, Rick Perry, has an ongoing prayer call. I guess he wants to have a conference. Apparently being governor is not good enough for him. Back in May, he was appealing for prayers to end all the wildfires they're having there in Texas. We know how that turned out. And he wants to declare August 6th to be a day of prayer and fasting for our nation's challenges. Well, Governor, as my shirt says, nothing fails like prayer. The Texas wildfires are still raging, and we think that firefighters on the ground would be more effective than lips that pray. The governor is supposed to be administering the resources of the state, not trying to be a de facto pastor. And we really think that Texas needs a governor and not a pastornator.
Right.
All right.
So most people, I think, are aware that we survived the declared rapture back on May 21st. We mentioned that on a previous show I was on. But there have been some more recent updates on that story. Specifically, the Freedom from Religion Foundation that I mentioned earlier. They have looked into perhaps initiating legal proceedings. Do you know if
they've suggested to the Attorney General of California,
right,
that Herald Camping and Family Radio be investigated for fraud.
Right.
Because they're basically selling a product that doesn't do what it claims to do, and they're taking people's money on this.
Right. Quite a bit of money, I think, in many cases. I think some people essentially gave their life savings to this camping fellow, and they won't see that again.
Yeah, the Freedom from Religion Foundation website says, quote, "Our organization seeks to hold camping accountable in a more tangible way." And speaking to the Attorney General, we ask you to investigate camping's 501c 3 non-profit organization for fraud and deceit. Okay.
Let's see what becomes of that. Okay, so today's show is what we call our Ingersoll and Twain show. I think most viewers, indeed most Americans, I think, are fairly well familiar with Mark Twain. He is perhaps the best known American author. Robert Ingersoll is, I suspect, not so well known to many of our viewers, and certainly not to Americans more broadly. Robert Ingersoll, though, in his time was one of the most famous Americans alive, the latter part of the 19th century. He was known as an orator. He spoke on many different subjects, but he was most well known for the talks he did on the topic of religion. He was known as the great agnostic, and he talked about some of the problems he had with organized religion. He was born in New York, Dresden, New York. He was the son of a Congregationalist preacher. His father had abolitionist leanings, and so the family actually had to do quite a bit of moving around. The father was a bit of a firebrand, and he would often irritate members of his own congregation, and they would get upset, and he would have to move somewhere else. So that was kind of the environment that Robert Ingersoll himself grew up in. When he got a little bit older himself, he trained as a lawyer. Became certified as a lawyer, living in Illinois at the time. When the Civil War broke out, he was already well established as a lawyer and a leader in the community, and
active in the Republican Party, I believe.
He was. Well, yes, he was. Yes, and he became a colonel in the Union Army at that time. Now, many people may not be thoroughly familiar with the way some officer commissions were granted at the time of the Civil War. It's not as if Robert Ingersoll attended West Point and then was commissioned as a second lieutenant and served his years growing up. It was not uncommon in those times that if you were a real organizer of a local group, to join the Union Army, you would be given a fairly high-ranking commission, which is what happened with Ingersoll. He organized the 11th, was it 11th Cavalry?
Brigade or
11th,
Cavalry, yeah.
What was it called?
I'll confess I don't recognize those divisions myself, nor how many persons it would have
the 11th Illinois Cavalry, to get it right. And again, because he was a local leader, well-connected, he was able to raise this group, and he was made a colonel in the Union Army. Now, his service in the Army, he didn't see all that much actual combat himself. He was taken a prisoner while serving, and there's a funny story.
Early in the war.
Fairly early on. There's a story about when he was being held with other prisoners of war. He got up on a stump and was giving a speech at the time about the Union effort, and one of the Confederate high-ranking officers came by and was so irritated that he was giving the speech and everything that he said, Ingersoll, I'll ransom you, if you'll go back and not be a part of the war anymore, if you stop giving that speech right now, which is what happened. So he was essentially, excuse me, my microphone.
So
he was essentially dismissed early from the war.
And apparently that was common early in the war, that combatants who were captured were released on condition that they remain non-belligerent, I guess would be the term.
Right. So after the war, he did return to his law practice. He was called Colonel Ingersoll for the rest of his life. But while he continues law practice, and he was a very successful lawyer in that respect, his true profession became known as an orator. He started giving speeches really on the topic of free thought, and he continued to make a very lucrative living on that the rest of his life.
In addition to Freethought, I know he's done a few other things I've not read much of, but apparently he was an expert on Shakespeare.
He was. He became an expert and was a huge fan of the genius of Shakespeare.
And I've seen allusions to him taking stands on this question of whether or not there should be a gold currency or a silver currency, and it was fascinating to read one side of it, and it made me want to read and understand the other side of it all.
Yeah.
We live in a time where those kind of issues have been well, they're not hotly debated like they once were.
True.
He was also involved in trying to promote unions and respectable working conditions,
Really?
and I think something like the
Right.
5-day work week.
Right. He was an advocate for the rights of freed slaves and for the rights of women in his day. So he did speak on many topics. He would give lectures on Reconstruction that was going on at the time. One of the things I'm most appreciative to Ingersoll for was the talks he gave on Thomas Paine. You know, I think most of us who grew up in our generation, faithless, are aware of the role that Thomas Paine played in our nation's Revolutionary War. You know, the pamphlets that he wrote, etc. But what I've read is that in Ingersoll's time, Thomas Paine had been almost completely forgotten. You know, his reputation was kind of swept under the rug.
Repressed, perhaps?
Probably repressed because of his own free-thinking views. And almost single-handedly, Ingersoll is given credit for rehabilitating and revitalizing the memory of Thomas Paine, which, you know, as I say, persists to this day. And so I'm thankful for that.
And especially Thomas Paine's important work, Age of Reason.
Right, definitely. But yeah, he gave lectures on that. But he was by far the most popular orator of his day. You know, people would quite literally travel either on foot or on horseback for 2 or 3 days to attend one of his lectures. He would typically deliver his lectures for about 3 hours. He would speak without notes and without pause, and holding every person's attention, you know, rapt during that time. I think in today's world, you know, where we have such short attention spans, you know, a 15-second clip of a cat on a playground slide is about the most that can hold our attention these days. But in those days, it was easy for people to stand and listen to a lecture for 3 hours.
Yes, indeed. It's a different world then. People were more literate, interested in the written word. It's delightful to read Ingersoll. He has a marvelous way of using playful vocabulary as well as well-constructed arguments. You can tell he's a lawyer when he does that.
Yeah, truly a master of the English language. I'll hold up a book here in a second in case people are interested in. Orvin Larson, American author, wrote this biography of Robert Greene Ingersoll called American Infidel, and I can definitely recommend it to people in case they're interested in it. I know you also are a fan of a book here. I'll hold this one up too, or you can.
We'll have a moving target here.
This is out of Ingersoll's own hand, notes collected from some of his lectures called Some Mistakes of Moses, in which he takes on the Pentateuch.
All right.
So he was not only a hugely popular orator, he was one of the best-known Americans of the time, and so he attracted controversy because he would travel to these towns to give his lectures, and a lot of the locals, especially the local clergy, would be upset, you know, that
the infidel is coming to town,
and he would, you know, be leading their flock astray. And some of the worst offenses they thought was that he would sometimes deliver his lectures on Sundays, you know, which people thought was doubly offensive, because when people should have been in church listening to the preacher, they were instead at Ingersoll's lecture listening to him.
And Freethought.
And Freethought, yeah. And so the ministers would complain about this, and Ingersoll would say in his own defense, he says, you know, I'm not forcing anyone to come to my lectures, plus I'm charging them $1 to come to my lecture. They can get into the sermon for free, and this is back when $1 was a lot of money to those people.
That's right. $1 would have been something like a day's wages.
So easily, I would think so. Yeah.
All right. Well, would you like me to speak a little bit about Mark Twain? We can compare and contrast.
Please do so.
All right. Well, Mark Twain was born just a couple of years later than Ingersoll. I think Ingersoll was 1833. Mark Twain's 1835.
Correct.
And grew up in Hannibal, Missouri. And, of course, Mark Twain is merely the pen name for Samuel Clemens. I must admit, it was years before I knew what pen names were, and so it's hard for me to remember him as anything other than Mark Twain. He grew up in Hannibal, Missouri, and as a young man, when the Civil War was starting, he alleges, this is something that he's written about later, he alleges that he and some fellow compatriots formed a small brigade themselves, and for 2 weeks were part of the Confederate movement. But he rather quickly, I guess, gave that up and went off to California. I believe he spent most of the Civil War time in California. And from California, he traveled off to the Sandwich Islands. Sandwich Islands don't go by that name anymore. They are the 51st state of the United States, sorry, the 50th state, Hawaii, where he had a nice time and wrote, I think he began writing travel logs due to experiences like that. Well, after the Civil War, Mark Twain fell into a marvelous opportunity. He got a newspaper to pay for him to travel on a steamship across the Atlantic and go visit the Holy Lands, meaning the Mediterranean. And he wrote a travel log about that. Travel logs were beginning to become kind of popular because travel was getting easier. Trains had been operating for 30 plus years, and the people's horizons in life were broadly expanded. In fact, it's his travel log, I'm told, Innocents Abroad, that gave him something like international fame. He had minor national fame with the Jumping Frog of Cavaliers County, or however it's pronounced, which is from a California location. He wrote on a wide variety of topics himself, but it's mostly fiction. I have read a few of his works that were like literary criticism, for instance, but he largely wrote with a sort of surprise at the world at which he found, and that lends itself to being a travel log. You go visit a novel place, and you recount how it is both similar and different to what you're familiar with.
True.
Well, we should remind people that this is a call-in program. The phone number is there on the television, and we're talking about Robert Ingersoll and Mark Twain today, and both of them are widely known as Freethought people. Okay, we've covered some of the biographical portions of Ingersoll and Twain. We've compared and contrasted their Civil War experiences. And both of them, interestingly enough, are acquaintances with General Ulysses Grant. Mark Twain published Grant's autobiography,
Right.
and I guess
His publishing company.
I guess he made a lot of money for Grant. Grant would have otherwise died deeply in debt,
That's right.
and that autobiography left his estate with a positive balance.
True. Yeah, he was dying of cancer. Grant was, and he wrote his autobiography hoping that the proceeds from that would support his family after his passing, and he was successful in that. And you mentioned that it was Twain's publishing company who did produce that autobiography, and it's perhaps worth noting that Mark Twain, while he made a lot of money off of his writing and had some successful endeavors such as publishing Grant's autobiography, Twain was remarkably bad with money. He made some horrible investments, and he was apparently a real target for people with a lot of get-rich schemes. They could get Twain to invest in their dreams, and he lost quite a bit of money in multiple endeavors.
Now, the biographies of Twain do talk about his enthusiasm for technology.
True.
And it turns out that the thing that I think it was after publishing Grant's autobiography, his company had made quite a bit of money, and then he sunk it all and then some into an automatic typesetting machine.
Right.
And that thing was just a money sink. I think they say that it was the equivalent in unadjusted dollars today of being like $7 million he poured into it.
Yeah.
And not merely did it fail and consume the $7 million, but it left him in debt that he spent quite a bit of time paying off. There's an interesting story behind that. His wife's fortune was also invested in it, and that's both good and bad. It's bad in that, well, he lost her fortune, but it was good in that she was therefore technically a creditor to his estate, and the bankruptcy judge granted her his copyrights and publishing rights. So the family never lost control of the rights to publish his material due to his bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I was just going to try to find the name. There's a famous name to the automatic type setting machine you were talking about. I was drawing a blank on it.
Yeah,
the Page typesetting machine. After, as you say, after he lost so much money in that, he was forced to declare bankruptcy. But it's perhaps an indication of Mark Twain's character that while he was the bankruptcy gave him legal relief from having to repay the debts he owed. He worked very hard and repaid every one of his creditors.
That's right. That was the proper end to that story. I got tied up in only part of it. Later in life, he was publishing things and traveling abroad and giving speeches to earn money to clear that debt. Mm-hmm. We have this interesting parallel again where they both were public speakers. Mm-hmm. In fact, both of them would talk about people they know, and the one in common I know once again is Grant.
Right.
We have
also Walt Whitman. I think they were both fans of Walt Whitman.
That's true.
Right. And,
that's true.
Yep.
All right. Well, we've talked a little bit about what Ingersoll spoke on, and I guess I wanted to mention some of the things about how Mark Twain wrote and the nature of his free thought. And certainly one of the things we can say is that Twain and Ingersoll rejected the Bible as dogma, meaning that it was something you didn't think of as sacred, couldn't be enlarged upon, let's say. And although this was published posthumously, Mark Twain even wrote a marvelous story called Letters from Earth. And this is letters between the archangels Satan, Gabriel, and Michael. And it's written kind of, again, like a travelogue. And it begins where we see that heaven and creation is being revealed, and one of the angels remarks, "The introduction and invention of automatic, unsupervised, self-regulating law for the government of the myriad of the whirling and and racing suns and worlds." That's it, cries Satan. You perceive that it is a stupendous idea. Nothing approaching it has been evolved from the master's intellect before. I thought it was interesting that he would choose to use the word evolve, since even in his time, evolve would have been a controversial word in that context. Automatic law, exact and unvarying, requiring no watching, no correcting or readjusting while the eternities endure. So in a sense, right there, he's having, in the lips of Satan, he's denying miracles, mm-hmm. because automatic law doesn't need adjusting. All right. He said those vast, countless bodies would plunge through the wastes of space and the ages at unimaginable speeds around stupendous orbits, yet never collide, and never lengthening nor shortening their orbital periods so much as by the 100th part of a second in 2,000 years. Of course, we know with modern technology that's actually not the case. All right, so that was Satan remarking on the creation of automatic law. And Gabriel says, also he said he would, by and by, create animals and place them likewise under the authority of the law. And Satan replies, yes, I heard him, but I did not understand. What is animals, Gabriel? And Gabriel replies, how should I know? How should any of us know? It's a new world.
Or new word.
A new word. Oh, goodness, I messed up. So then there's an editorial comment. An interval of 3 centuries celestial time passes, the equivalent of 100 million earthly years. And then a messenger angel enters and announces excitedly, my lords, He's making animals. Will it please you to come and see? So I thought what was cool about that is that right away, Twain is working off this idea that people who try to apologize for the Bible say, oh, well, days means long ages. And in fact, 3 centuries of angel time turns into 100 million years of earthly time. Mm-hmm. So once again, what was the point of all of this? He treats the Bible as sort of true, but the characters, especially that are within it, are nothing recognizable out of the Christian Bible. Mm-hmm. They're people who show curiosity. Mm-hmm. They're people who sometimes are not completely respectful.
Right.
And so he's introducing us to a new world where we can marvel at the strangeness of the things that we encounter.
Right.
All right. I think we've covered most of it.
Okay. You mentioned that Twain's work, Letters from the Earth, was published posthumously. This might be a good time to mention another book which is out now. It's been published within the last year. This is the first volume of Mark Twain's autobiography. It's published by the University of California Press, and the fact that it is being published now is not coincidental. Mark Twain understood that within his own time that many of his beliefs were, so controversial to people, and he didn't want to bring a lot of disrepute onto his own family, and so it was delayed 100 years. We can maybe get back to that in a minute. We may have a phone call coming in.
I think Jonas is catching the phone call.
So I'll continue with this for a minute then. He had views not just on religion, but also on a lot of American foreign policy. There was a lot of discussion of American imperialism at the time, and Twain himself was very much opposed to imperialism, and so he learned quickly to kind of keep some of his opinions to himself.
All right. Well, we've got a caller here. Dale, why don't you introduce him?
Sure. Hello, you're on Freethought Forum. Do we have a name?
Alan.
Hello, Alan. Welcome. Do you have a question or comment for us today?
I've got a comment and kind of a question too, I guess. My thoughts were, how do you guys feel about confrontation with believers? I'm a non-believer. Kind of consider myself more of an anti-theist, I guess, and an atheist. Looking at belief in medieval beings and gods as being something that's dangerous to society. My feelings are that when I talk to people who do believe is to try and show them how illogical that is and try and prevent that.
Mm-hmm. So if you're asking us our opinions on perhaps confrontational interaction with believers, maybe let you take that first, Lee?
Well, sure enough. And of course, there's no one right answer. And if we want to be effective, we maybe need to look for the answer that works. But of course, our program and our presence here is a first effort just simply not to be invisible. We want to make sure that people understand that right here in East Tennessee, there are people who live a life free of supernatural beliefs. As members of the Rationalists of East Tennessee and the Atheist Society in Knoxville, we also interact with others from whom we learn, and that has expanded my vocabulary and ability to talk about reasons for disbelief beyond merely the ones that I had. Probably one of the more profound things I learned as a member of the Rationalists of East Tennessee, and it actually stems from some of the assertions Ingersoll makes, that the God of the Bible, it's not merely that he's just imaginary, but he's actually immoral. And we got into this discussion at an RIT event about the hypothetical question. All right, suppose we die and we discover there is a God. And as a physicist, I right away thought, great, I'll be able to ask all these questions about the physical evolution of the universe and cosmology that I never lived long enough to find the answers to. But one of the members said, but wait a minute, isn't there a different question you should ask? And that question would be, why is there suffering? Why do horrible things happen here in the real world, and you're not intervening to make this a better world? So so I think I've answered a little of your question about if I were to have a conversation with some believers, that may be one of the approaches I take.
And Alan, speaking for myself personally now, I tend to be a fairly non-confrontational person in this regard. I have many close friends and relatives who are believers, and while I don't hide my own disbelief from them, I don't really seek to challenge them on their own beliefs. It's clearly something, in my mind, it's clearly something that makes them happy, and I don't really desire to take that away from them. So to the extent that Christians want to challenge me on my beliefs or lack thereof, I feel like I'm prepared to defend myself, but it's certainly not the sort of thing I think I seek out.
Yeah, I would say that with in my personal life, I have little reason to bring it up, but I have participated with the Rationalists of East Tennessee and the Atheist Society of Knoxville to have an opportunity to have social interaction where we can talk about a larger sphere of subjects than we would otherwise.
So, Alan, do you find that you enjoy more direct confrontation, and what do you feel is gained out of that, either on your behalf or on the believer's behalf?
Well, I don't enjoy it. If I could snap my fingers and show people the light that what they're believing in is more than likely false, I'm not one who's going to ever say that there definitely is not a God, because I can't prove that. Mm-hmm. But more than likely there is not, and I believe very strongly that there is not. I believe that the belief in a God is detrimental to mankind. I think that people who believe in God, they think they have the answer, and it's just, well, why is this way? Well, if you just, that's the way God made it. Well, then why do you look for an answer? I think they are holding us back in our evolution of our intelligence as a race, and I think that for years I didn't say anything about being an atheist, and you go to dinner with people, and they want to say grace, and you kind of go along with the game, and you bow your head, and I finally came to the realization that I think that we all have a personal responsibility to our fellow humankind to try and prevent the damage that is more than likely going to occur because of the holy wars, and the planes got flown into the buildings on a religious belief, and
we call that a faith-based initiative, and to let you know where we stand on that religion and government separation issue.
I just think that we have a more of a responsibility. Been watching a lot of the Atheist Experience out of Austin. I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes.
I kind of like their approach to not be rude and pretty much not be crude. Once in a while, I think they are, but I think you have to let people call in and say, hey, this is what I believe, and maybe when you're out in public and some of your friends want to say grace or I think you kind of have a personal responsibility to ask that person, okay, why do you believe in God? And then they say, well, look around, look at the trees. Okay, well, let me explain to you how trees got to be,
Be prepared not to be invited to so many dinners if you take that approach, Alan.
Well, and if you are, what have you lost?
Well,
I mean, is that really who you want to call your friends?
Well, let me take the most positive spin on their behalf that I can, and that is that every Christian, it has ever been my pleasure to know, is better than the God of their Bible. I have had occasion to say that to a few people so that we could discuss the morality. And by the way, I often usually try to use a proper name. I usually say Jehovah or Yahweh because, of course, one of the very first things we want to say, and you alluded it to yourself, you said, well, we can't say that there is no God. Well, we have to define which one we mean. We can be pretty sure there isn't a Zeus, and I think we can be equally sure that there isn't a Jehovah. What we can't be certain of is that there is some supernatural thing that we've never yet quite defined, and in other words, we can't rule out all those that haven't been made up yet.
True.
Did you follow my reasoning there?
Yeah, and you never will. And religious people keep moving God farther and farther and farther out of reach to where you can't prove it. You know, I mean, if you look at the old pictures, God was, I guess, in the clouds, you know. Mm-hmm. Then we got out into space, and now he must be somewhere on another plane, not even in this universe. You know?
Yeah. In fact, you couldn't even talk about where God is if it wasn't for the advances of science and mathematics, where we can conceive of higher dimensions or something like that.
But isn't the belief in God holding science and advances back?
Oh yeah, because the answer God did it is an answer that stops further inquiry.
Yeah. There's no more investigation after that, and there's no more questioning, and it's just brainwashed into every person's head from a child, most people anyway, not to even question. You know, it's just blasphemy to even question. And I think we need to evolve from that. I've talked to some younger people, and they tell me that they don't discuss religion. It's just not a topic for them. They've told me that it doesn't seem like a whole lot of people care. And to me, that's a good thing too. But I think also, rather than not talk about it, I think you have to kind of show it for what it is. I think you have to just, you're believing in something here without any facts, without any evidence. And I think maybe it needs called out a little bit more than what it is.
All right, well, thank you for the call, Alan. Have we answered your question?
Okay.
I have a question, though, for you, Alan, before you go. May I ask,
sure.
how did you find our show?
Oh, surfing the Internet.
Okay. And have you watched
the
us?
Internet is probably one of the best tools to end religion that there's ever going to be, because now you're not just taking mom and dad's word for it anymore. And your ability to research it and find out for yourself is pretty much unlimited.
All right, great. Is this the first time you've caught us live?
Yeah, it's the first time I've called in. I actually put you guys on my cell phone a couple of weeks ago, and just today seemed like a good day, and I've kind of been thinking I don't get you in my area on Comcast.
That was about what I was going to ask, is are you local to us? We're here in East Tennessee.
Wish I did. Don't know if you guys have any plans to broadcast live on the Internet or not.
Oh goodness, we're just we're sort of stumbling our way through this learning process currently.
And I think more people need to help with that too. You know, I'm sure there's some people out there right now listening and watching you guys on TV who could help with that. And I would ask that everybody think about how they could help with that. If indeed this is the way you do, you are a non-believer. I think it's time to speak up and quit being ashamed and quit, you know, acting like you do when you don't. And you're justified in your beliefs. And quit being so ashamed and thinking that you're an outcast, because you're not.
All right, well, thank you for your call, Alan.
Hey, great. Okay. Have a good day. Keep on keeping on.
You too.
Thanks.
All right. Well, we have a mid-program break, and we've come past the midpoint here. Why don't we get the slides up for this? And it sounds like Jonas is going to be, our call screener is going to be screening another call. All right, why don't you grab the first part of it.
So in case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a joint production of the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rashless of East Tennessee. They jointly fund it, and we have individual contributions as well.
All right. You can send us feedback on the email address that we'll have up there. Actually, Dale's head's covering part of it. freethoughtforum@yahoo.com. All right. The Atheist Society of Knoxville meets several times a week. We usually get together in the evening for food, fun, and drink. We are atheists, agnostics, and freethinkers. and we like to meet others in East Tennessee. Well, we've got another call. Why don't we do that? We'll get back to in the break later.
Okay. Hello, you're on Freethought Forum. Can we have a name?
Chuck.
Hello, Chuck. Welcome.
Hello, thanks for calling.
I have a comment with regard to how one deals with believers. It seems to me there are innumerable examples of the harm that religion does to society, that you don't have to be an atheist or an agnostic to understand or realize is wrong. But I think atheists and agnostics ought to be especially sensitive to this and especially willing to speak out because something needs to be done. We have fundamentalist Christians who are saying we can ignore global warming because it's just a sign of the end times and we can't do anything about it and we're all going to be raptured anyway, so what difference does it make? We have other kinds of problems like that. I just think that it's a mistake to be passive and not to be more active in going after these people. You mentioned going after the minister in California. There are people here in Knoxville who take money on
on similar false pretenses.
Honest basis in churches. And there are mega churches that make all kinds of money, and the people get very little, if anything, in return. I think they're not really non-profit organizations, they're for-profit organizations. That's something that could be attacked via the Internal Revenue Service. I have yet to see anybody really do that. I just think that there should be a more active approach. And I don't know if your program is one that would really be a vehicle for doing that, but I would hope somebody would be doing it. That's all I really want to say, and I'll hang up and let you say what you want about it.
All right, Chuck. Well, thank you for calling in. And is this the first time that you've watched? Oh, maybe he's already gone. All right. Yeah. All right, great.
Okay.
Well, we are trying not to be passive here, and we're trying not to be invisible. We had some more things from the mid-program break. How we doing? We got 16 minutes left. Let's see. I was talking about the Atheist Society of Knoxville. From their website, they say their mission statement is to supply a venue for community, camaraderie, and outreach to the rationalists and atheists of the Knoxville area. Remember, you're not alone. In fact, when I log in there and read the initial sign-up messages from a lot of these people, that's a very common thread. I thought I was the only one. Right. Yeah. There's no one I can talk to about
Didn't know there were other people like me in the Knoxville area.
Yeah, very common thread. All right, you want to touch on some of the rationalists of East Tennessee here?
Right. We mentioned a lot of this at the top of the show, but just as our mid-program break, I'll reiterate some of this. They generally meet on Sundays, first, second, and third Sundays, have different lectures, roundtables, and book club events. So I encourage people to go to the website, www.rationalist.org, to read more about their calendar of events. All right. And the Rationalists of East Tennessee also sponsor something kind of interesting. It is a secular alternative to a vacation Bible study camp. It's called Camp Quest of the Smokies. It's 6 fun-filled days in the Smoky Mountains of East Tennessee. Right. Camp Tremont there in the Smokies.
All right, and I believe it's for ages. I'm improvising without notes. I'm going to say it's something like 8 to 17.
Sounds about right.
And they've signed up more people than ever. They're getting close to the limit they'll be able to take. So it's a good idea, if you're interested at all, to sign in, to go to the website, which is smokymountains.camp-quest.org. Actually, you can also go to the rationalist.org website and find a link from there.
So just like that.
There we go.
SmokyMountains.campquest.org. We'll get it up there. There's a dash in there.
They're still accepting camperships, as they refer to it, but they're filling fast.
Right. Urge people to take action soon if they're interested in that. The parents, free-thinking parents, and or anyone that wants their children to have a nice camp experience that focuses on things like science and critical thinking. This is a great venue for them.
You can see that in these slides. I believe that was last summer. They separated DNA.
Right.
I know in past years they've done something that's fascinating to participate with. And as an adult, I was requested to be quiet so that the kids alone could do it. It's called Socrates Cafe, where they discussed such questions as the nature of suffering. All right. And it's interesting to hear such young minds grapple with those, kind of adult problems.
Right.
All right.
So, to return to our Ingersoll and Twain show for a moment, one of the things that was just pervasive throughout Ingersoll's life as a lecturer and as a public intellectual, as a newspaper commentator, was his rejection of the concept, the biblical concept of eternal damnation. He said many times, there was no more lousy concept that existed, and so he spoke out against that almost everywhere he went. He had a certain affinity for the Unitarians and Universalists of his day. That was during the time before those two churches had combined.
Merged.
Yes, right. They've merged into a single Unitarian Universalist church now, and I know that some of the viewers of our show are members of the Unitarian Universalist Church, and I thought it'd be worthwhile for just a second here to mention a couple of things that Ingersoll had to say about Unitarians and Universalists. He said, "Do not forget to say that I mean Orthodox churches, Orthodox clergy, because I have great respect for Unitarians and Universalists. The Unitarian Church has done more than any other church, and maybe more than all other churches, to substitute character for creed. I want to thank the Unitarian Church for what it has done. I want to thank the Universalist Church too. They at least believe in a God who is a gentleman. They believe at least in a Heavenly Father who will leave the latch string out until the last child gets home." And I must admit, I have a special place in my heart for that concept that he mentions there at the end. Ingersoll rejected the idea that there could be no hope for redemption from a loving deity, and he spoke out against it all the time.
Yeah, I think one of his phrases was that, why should there be infinite consequences for finite mortals for mistakes they make in this lifetime?
Right.
And why is there infinite chance for redemption while you're alive and no chance when you're dead?
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, Mark Twain also, in his writings, touches on issues of sinning and worrying about a future state. And in his book, Huck Finn, the central character Huck is grappling with a growing worry that he has sinned by helping a runaway slave. But the problem is this runaway slave has become his friend, and so he doesn't quite know what to do. Quoting from Huck Finn, "It made me shiver. I was about made up my mind to pray and see if I couldn't try to quit being the kind of boy I was and be better. So I knelt down, but the words wouldn't come. Why wouldn't they? It weren't no use to try and hide it from him, nor from me neither. I know very well why they wouldn't come. It was because my heart weren't right. It was because I weren't squared. It was because I was playing double." So apparently he thought you can't fool God. "I was letting on to give up sin, but always inside of me I was holding on to the biggest one of all. I was trying to make my mouth say I would do the right thing and clean thing and go and write to that slave's owner and tell where he was. But deep down in me I know it was a lie." Well, so then what he does is he gets out a piece of paper and he writes it down. So Huck continues, I felt so good, all washed, clean of sin, and for the first time I had never felt so in my life, and I knowed I could pray now." So he begins to pray a little bit, but then he thinks on it, and he decides that would be ungrateful. I said I was the best friend old Jim ever had in the world, and the only one he's got now. And then I happened to look around and see that paper. It was a close place. I took it up, and I held it in my hand. I was trembling because I had got to decide forever betwixt two things, and I noted. I studied a minute, sort of holding my breath, and then says to myself, all right then, I'll go to hell. And I tore it up. It was awful thoughts and awful words, but they was said, and I let them stay said, and I never thought no more of reforming. So in it, Huck grapples with the immorality that the Bible says that slavery is right, and he decides that he can't be that kind of moral. Mm-hmm. So I think that's Mark Twain speaking for us, much like Ingersoll was speaking for Mark Twain, speaking through a fictional character.
Right. Yeah.
And although I'm fond of many things Twain does, certainly that part of Huck Finn has to be amongst his greatest writings.
Nope. One of Twain's famous quips, I guess, was heaven for the climate, hell for the company.
Hell for the company.
That's right.
All right. Well, we've got about 7 minutes left. We certainly invite anyone who's watching to call in and maybe share with us some of your ideas about Mark Twain or Robert Ingersoll. Certainly there's lots of quotes available on each of them. The heaven for the company, heaven for the climate,
hell for the company.
Hell for the company. All right, great. Sounds like we've enticed someone to call in. I guess we need a minute or so to kill here. We have a few quotes from members of the Rationalists of East Tennessee and or the Atheist Society of Knoxville when I sent an email asking them that same question. Give us your favorite quotes. All right, so from D, we have from a Mark Twain quote. You believe in a book that has talking animals, wizards, witches and demons, sticks turning into snakes, burning bushes, food falling from the sky, and walking on water, all sorts of magical, absurd, and primitive stories, and you say that we are the ones who need help. All right, well, let's meet our caller.
Hello, and welcome to Freethought Forum. We have a name?
Yes, Tim.
Hello, Tim. Welcome. Do you have a question or comment for us?
Yes, I was wanting to address, you mentioned something, and I believe this is Mark Twain's writing about how, the Bible talked about how slavery was. It was okay to have slaves in the Bible.
Yes.
Sure. That's in Leviticus.
Well, I think you really need to go back and reread that because it wasn't talking about slavery like they had in the Old South. I don't think that's exactly the context that the bondservant of the Old Testament would have, even though they can call it the same name. It's not exactly the same context because the Bible does speak out against man stealers, which I think that would be more in line with what the slavery of the Civil War days and that time was.
Sure.
The Bible talks about taking conquered enemies as slaves, especially the young women from your conquered enemies.
But it wasn't talking about the slavery like we see in the Old South. It was more of a bondservant.
In many cases, it would be far worse. I mean, you're talking about concubines in some of these cases.
Depending upon where you read, Tim may have a point, but he's looking at something that he can give the most favorable interpretation to. In the case of Hebrews, the Bible says that you can buy a Hebrew for something like 7 years, after which they shall go free. That's very much like the indentured servitude of the 16 and 1700s. But in Leviticus chapter 25, we'll start at verse 44. As for your male and female slaves, whom you may have from the nations that are around you, from them you may buy male and female slaves. Moreover, you may buy the children of the strangers who dwell among you, and their families who are with you, which they beget in your land, and they shall become your property. I think that's pretty much, that's pretty unequivocal, isn't it?
Well, I think when you're looking at something like that, you're also having to think these were not in much. Yeah, I can see where you'd say that would be unruly in the day, but wouldn't you say that now that it's a little bit different?
Old but different. Well, if what you're saying is that the Bible no longer applies, we certainly hope that's the case. We don't think that this is a good book for moral guidance.
You don't think that anything in the book is good for moral guidance?
Oh, we didn't say that.
But as Ingersoll says, he doesn't deny that there's some wisdom in the Bible, but he doesn't deny that there's a lot of immoral stuff and folly as well. And what he says is, don't call folly wisdom just because it happens to be found in wisdom's company. I mean, if there's folly in the Bible, let's call it folly.
And what's more is, if there's folly in the Bible, doesn't that mean that it can't be the result of some perfect, benevolent God? If there is a perfect, benevolent God, this is not that book.
Yeah, well, there's not any folly in that book at all.
So the idea that it says there that you can buy children and they will be your property
was of the practice of that day.
So morals are relative?
Yeah, and of that day, but they didn't treat them like some of the slaves from some of the other countries.
No, and they said, if you beat your slave so bad that he dies within 3 days, that's bad. But if it takes him more than 3 days to die, that's not quite such a sin. I mean, I don't see how things in that day were a lot better. I don't see how you can say that.
Yeah, you're arguing for actually the worst of moral relativism. You're going to say, well, I'll just find if I want to do something, I can find a passage in the Bible that will give me permission to ease my troubled conscience. And what we're saying is that no, we really want to hold ourselves to a higher standard of behavior. We really want to do no thing which we would not want done unto us.
Right.
And
I really appreciate your free thought on that. That you're not closed to other people's ideas or anything like that. And I appreciate your program.
All right.
Well, thank you for your call.
All right, Tim, before you go, can you tell us, how did you find us?
Just channel surfing across the TV.
Hope it didn't shock you.
And is today the first day that you saw us?
Yes.
All right, well, we're here most Tuesdays at 5 o'clock. And let us wish you goodbye. We have to wrap up the program now because it's almost the end of the show. Thanks much.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
All right. Well, I guess we touched on that moral relativism thing here.
Right.
We had a few more Twain quotes, but I think we're kind of running down.
We could do Twain and Ingersoll quotes all day long, but simply out of time.
Find one last one.
Well, no.
Faith is believing what you know ain't so. Mark Twain.
That's a good one.
All right, Ingersoll. Ingersoll. If a man would follow today the teachings of the Old Testament, he would be a criminal. If he would follow strictly the teachings of the New, he would be insane. All right, well, let's wrap this up.
So it's time to start wrapping things up. If you have a pen and paper, you can write down our address. You can provide us feedback at freethoughtforum, all one word, at yahoo.com.
All right. You can call into this station here and buy past episodes of this and other programs on DVD. And I guess this has been Freethought Forum. I'm Faithless Forrest.
I'm Dale Haste. And our thanks also to Jonas and Sam and Larry for helping us out tonight, and the staff of here at Community Television Knoxville. And as Mark Twain said, it ain't those parts of the Bible that I can't understand that bother me. It's the parts that I do understand.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and especially our callers. Have a good day.